Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Wisdom Window. I'm Maddi Cheers. I'm here with my co-host, Marianne Franzese. Hi, Mare.
Hi, Maddie.
How you doing today?
Pretty good.
And we are here with our special guest, Bob Vetter, who is my husband, to help us talk about the wisdom of community healing. So all of us are involved in different forms of community healing. We have women's circles, we have sweat logic, but I especially wanted to have Bob on today to really speak to communitas. And you can tell us a little bit about yourself and then go on to whatever you'd like to say.
Sure. So, as a cultural anthropologist, my background is in understanding the wisdom of non-Western cultures. I should say that that's what brought me to cultural anthropology in the first place, is that I felt that there were things wrong with my society that I grew up in, and it led me to want to look at alternative ways of understanding ourselves and understanding our place in the world. And that took me to Asian philosophies, Asian ways of thinking originally, and then eventually it led me in graduate school to come to learn the ways of Native North Americans. So I did my field work among the Comanches and later Kiowas and other tribes in Oklahoma while I was a graduate student at the University of Oklahoma. And my area of interest was the intersection of spirituality and healing. And what I found there was that healing takes place almost exclusively in community. I mean, there is one healing ceremony, or one ceremony that I think is very important, is the vision quest, which was much more prevalent in times gone by. But that was an example of one, and the only one that I can think of, a ceremony that is done where a person is in isolation. Whereas all of the other ceremonies that have to do with healing largely involve the community in one way or another. And in that case, the power of the community is very, very strong in amplifying whatever the healing power is of a ceremony. That if there are lots of people within the family and in the outside community itself, that support is very important in affecting healing.
And I was wondering if you would speak to this idea that if you are healed and you feel yourself healed, but the community hasn't been involved in that healing, that sometimes they can actually bring you down. The healing can sort of be undone if they're not seeing you as healed.
Yeah, well, that's an important point, because when a person is healed, whatever it is that they go through, whatever it is that needed to be healed in the first place, this process of healing affects major change. And in a way, we could argue that there is a death that goes on in healing, a death of the old understanding of self and embracing something new. So it's like a symbolic process of death and rebirth. So if a person is healed and they go back into a community that, or family situation, or whatever their social context is, where that change is not acknowledged, it can be very counterproductive to their healing process.
So it's kind of like, I mean, in our world, I would guess, Marianne, the closest thing we have to it from a therapist point of view is group therapy, where you're sitting with community.
True. That is part of a community circle, healing groups that way. But my understanding too, Bob, is that like not all the healing has to happen in a group setting, right? Sometimes it can be one-on-one healing, but that is still considered part of community. So if there is a healer in the community who's working with someone on a one-on-one basis, it also is known within the community. Is that right?
That's true. That's true. And a lot of times the one-on-one healing can even take place with other people present. So, for example, a family may be involved in the entire process, or
Right.
there's ceremonies where it's the entire, I wouldn't say tribe, but let's say the whole collective, a collective of that community involved in it. But as you say, even if it is a one-on-one between a healer and a person being healed, it's still it has the support of the family and the community, and that's why sharing in values and beliefs is so important as well, because that the belief, the set of beliefs that a person goes into in the healing process is extremely important, and that's why a healer needs to, if they don't have to agree with the person, but it's important that they understand the other person's beliefs. So in my own work, for example, one of the first questions that I usually ask someone is what their spiritual beliefs are, whether they are religious, non-religious, do they consider themselves spiritual but not religious, because it's important to be able to share symbols with that person
Mhm.
in the healing process.
And I think it's important too, when you look at this indigenous way of healing, both in community and one-on-one or one-on family or whatever the context is that you, the healer, are going to, like you just said, you're going to adapt yourself to the person being healed. You are looking at this as an individual. You're not giving a diagnosis. You're not doing a one size fits all protocol for a person. If you're starting with getting to know them so that you can speak to them from where they are, that is a totally different approach than what we are used to in the West. Aside from, we're not used to people being in our group and us being healed with them. It's usually the doctor God who's healing us by ourselves, and then our family gets to come in later and we hopefully get support from them. But in this context, there's layers to the healing. That's what I always like about it. There could be some individual work. Then we're going to take it into the sweat lodge. Then we're going to sit in circle and talk about it. I always liked Dr. Louis Malmadrona's story about how they had this guy who the family was very upset with him, and he was an alcoholic. He wouldn't admit he was an alcoholic. And it's sort of like an intervention, but it sort of wasn't. Everybody got in a circle, and Dr. Malmadrona invited everybody that he could think of, including the garbage man. So everybody in the community there was a huge circle. And it was the garbage man that was able to report that, every time he picked up garbage, there were this many cans of empty bottles of liquor. And then as he revealed that, that was sort of the turning point for the person they were trying to help. He got very angry, but also he couldn't run away from that. So and the investment that your community makes in healing you, I think also keeps you from being lonely. One of the biggest problems they say we're facing during the pandemic, especially for young people, is loneliness.
Well, and I think that there is this wisdom in, it's not about being privately perfect. Like, we belong to a body, a community, and it's in the interrelationships that happen within that community that the person who is being healed is not the only one who is being healed. It is not
Right.
an identified patient. It is all of us heal from this healing because we're all part of the same body. And that, to me, what has always been so touching and holy about it is the community extends beyond the living. The dead are invited, the ancestors, the saints, the souls who have passed, the animals who have gone.
Yes.
They're part of this interconnectedness as well. And so, like, there is this sense of, you may be hurting today and I can offer support. But there is going to be a time when I am hurting and you will be able to offer support. So the view of the body, the fullness of the work, and to the wisdom that that kind of healing becomes holy because it is so inclusive and compassionate to every single person in the circle and those who are beyond this earth as well.
Exactly.
And
Very
you've probably heard me use this metaphor that probably more of a guy metaphor than a women's wisdom metaphor, but there is healing shrapnel. So in a healing ceremony, the people who are around are hit by that, the stray energy of that healing process. And that's my way of looking at it. There might be a better metaphor than that one.
No, I love that. It's true, because what is being done for one is being done for all. Their hearts, minds, bodies are connected in that space.
I know, it's always amazing to me how when we sit in circle, whether no matter what the circle is, that as people go around, as they speak, I'll be listening and I'll go, oh, that's exactly what I was thinking. And then somebody else will go, it just like how it builds and builds, because the circle itself creates an energy. That group of people creates an energy, and even more importantly, it sends that energy out into the world. As I think I've mentioned before, how Diane Longboat says, we do a lot of these ceremonies outside. We do them around the fire so that the energy of our words, the energy of our intention, the energy of our love for each other goes up and out to the world at large, and even to the universe at large.
Mm-hmm.
So it also kind of reminds me of a story that very much addresses this. That my first adopted father, his name was Fred Parton, and I went into the teepee with him the first time for the Native American church. And what he said in addressing the people in the teepee was, not one of us in here is perfect, but we stay together so that if one person falls down, the rest of us are here to pick them up.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of addresses what you said, Marianne, about, maybe today I'm the one who falls down and needs to be picked up, and you're there to do it, and tomorrow if you fall down, the rest of us are here to pick you up.
And it is so beautiful because it also then eliminates this sense of sort of hierarchy of who is well and who is unwell, and dissipates the stigma and shame that can be carried around needing healing.
Exactly.
Right.
And what the other thing that comes to my mind, in anthropology, I mean, one of the things that is very valuable, I think, about anthropology is that you have a whole world worth of list of cultures to draw examples from in whatever the topic is. And when it comes to the topic of healing, like what all of this reminded me of is the Kung people, or who are known as the Bushmen in southern Africa. And they have this concept that there is this boiling energy that comes about when people are in the group, through the music and through the dance. And when one person is sick, they sit down and the people begin dancing around that person who's the patient. And then spontaneously, different people, anybody from within the community that's gathered there, can be the one to place their hands on the patient so that the boiling energy goes into that person to heal them. And this is considered one of the oldest continuous groups of people on the planet, if not the oldest. And they have this tradition that suggests to me that there's something universally human about this process that we're talking about.
Yes. And I think that it is coming back in our culture, but sadly, when we get too attached to the idea that it's science alone that can heal us, it's a pill, it's a shot, it's a treatment, it's that alone is going to heal us, that's where we really get into trouble. And it's not to say that science hasn't done a wonderful job of healing many illnesses. What it has not done a wonderful job of is individualizing the healing process. And that is what happens, I think, a lot in Native cultures, but it also happens within that community healing process, because the community is dedicated to, it could be dedicated to healing itself, it could be dedicated to healing an individual. And I think that to deny that having people present, having that support system present for you is important is ridiculous. I mean, that we're just now in our culture talking about bringing in family to discuss treatment, bringing in this person, sitting in prayer circles, and we're seeing the scientific evidence for how sitting in prayer circles can actually help heal somebody. Whereas this has actually been a very, like Bob said, human tradition for a long time.
It's probably also worth addressing the difference between curing and healing. So there are cases where something is cured but not healed, and there are cases where something is healed and not cured. So, for example, if you go to the doctor, the conventional American doctor, and you have some very, very specific ailment that you go for, and you receive some treatment, that treatment may clear up something that is not life-threatening in any way. And that would be an example of a cure that's not necessarily a healing process. On the other hand, let's say that there is something that is life-threatening. Let's say it's a kind of cancer that is inoperable. A person might be healed but not be cured. So by healing, what we mean in this context is to make whole, to be complete. So there are cases where a person might not be able to be cured of the sickness. They may ultimately die of whatever that sickness is. And the process of coming together in community is very important in healing that person.
So, Bob, do you think it's the idea of having healings in community is actually sort of an embodiment of all the parts of you becoming whole through the ritual, the song, the dance, the music, the fire, the prayers, that is at the heart of every healing, a return to wholeness?
Well, I would say it's that a return to wholeness is at the heart of all healing. I don't know that I would go as far as to say that it has to take place in a group process. All I'm saying is that I think that a group process amplifies whatever's going on.
Mm-hmm.
That there's that much more cohesiveness. There's that much more process, knowing that you have all of the support of everyone.
And I think it's also important to note that in conventional medicine, especially with cancer, you are considered cured if you are cancer-free for 5 years. You go into the books, cured. You get that cancer back one day later, you're still in the books as cured. So that's, how honest is that? That we are looking at a situation where the cancer came back, but we're not really saying that it did. We're still going to say, oh yeah, this treatment cured this many people. And yet there's an extremely high rate of recurrence after 5 years. that does not really get reported on because that's now a separate case.
What I would say is that so much of it comes down to the individual who is doing the curing. That I don't want to demonize Western medicine either, because there are doctors who, in addition to being doctors, are very much healers. Be in the sense that they can establish a relationship with the patient. They can do the things that they can, through that relationship, affect healing. And that cross-culturally, that is considered to be maybe the most important factor in determining the outcome, is the relationship that develops between the healer and the patient or client. And we see the worst of that sometimes through managed healthcare, where you have maybe 5 minutes with a doctor, and not even to say that the doctor wants it that way, but that's the nature of managed healthcare, that they're going to give you a few minutes of their time and they're going to go on to somebody else. So rather than saying that Western medicine is incorrect here, I would say that managed healthcare is what limits the healing process.
Yeah.
And maybe the value, like you were saying earlier, really tuning into the value of the relationship as a very powerful medicine. And that's something that can be created in a lot of different ways, because my question always is, how do we cultivate this kind of healing community based on this indigenous wisdom, without appropriating, right? And yet taking steps towards really bringing this kind of community forward. And maybe it does start with values and a shift and an awakening to what are our values. I don't know, Bob, what are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are that we have a choice to create community from wherever we are. That what's important is to bring people together and to share values and understandings. So, there are 3 of us right now on this call doing this podcast. And I mean, the 3 of us have come together and created a small community right now.
Right.
Through our conversation, through our care for one another, through the love that we have for one another, we've created right now, in the immediacy of this moment, a type of community. And anybody who's listening right now who can feel that is a part of that community as well. Because you've chosen to be here, you've chosen to listen, which tells me that you probably have similar beliefs to me and Maddi and Marianne. And that's what brought you here in the first place. So there is a healing in that process. There is the concern that we share for one another. There is the consistency of showing up. There is the desire to reinforce that community on a regular basis. All of these are things that are not about going to another culture and taking something, but being moved enough by the wisdom of another culture to create a sense of community in our own. And never has that been more difficult, probably, than during COVID.
Right. And that's where the blessing of technology for all, everything has its great side and everything has its opposite. I wanted to read something from Tal Mendelbaum Ben Moshe, who is a psychologist, a friend. We've come to be friends. She's in Israel, and she is also a family therapist. She does a lot of work right now and has developed a course for young people who are feeling lonely and afraid and feel like they can't find love in their lives. And she said The myth is that we can only find ourselves when we are in solitude, meditating on a mountaintop. The truth is that it is in relationship to others that we can truly know ourselves. And I think that that's a lot of what we're speaking to. I know that when I did the course on becoming a death doula, a death midwife, whatever that's called, that was one of the things we talked about a lot, was the difference between sometimes you cannot cure somebody, and the healing in that case comes in getting the family and the friends and the person who's dying into a peaceful transition into the next world. And I always thought it was really interesting, the viewpoint of the Kaddish from Judaism, which I'm going to find in a second, because that prayer is it's so beautiful in the way it talks about moving into death. I think you sent this to me at one point, because we think of curing as and healing as, now I don't have the illness anymore. And if you still have the illness or you're still going to die, we're thinking, well, that guy failed, not a healer, not a doctor, I'm suing them. There's all of this. But I do love this meditation before Kaddish. When I die, give what's left of me away to children and old men that wait to die. And if you need to cry, cry for your brother walking the street beside you. And when you need me, put your arms around anyone and give them what you need to give me. I want to leave you something better than words or sounds. Look for me in the people I've known or loved. And if you cannot give me away, at least let me live in your eyes and not in your mind. You can love me best by letting hands touch hands and by letting go of children that need to be free. Love doesn't die, people do. So when all that's left of me is love, give me away.
Hmm.
And that's healing.
Wow.
That's beautiful.
Ooh.
I know.
So, I mean, we've talked a little bit about finding healing. I've given examples from non-Western cultures, and I should say that a lot of my training has come out of traditional Mesoamerican medicine, or curanderismo, and we've talked about where there is healing within Western medicine, where it applies and where it doesn't apply. I guess what I would ask you, Marianne, is to how do we find it within therapy, within psychotherapy?
Well, honestly, I really see a big shift in the whole field of psychology, and it is moving much more towards a compassionate view and an acceptance of the spectrum of suffering and a relief from that suffering by really creating a relationship both with a therapist and with yourself that is one based on this kind of concern, those words you used, acceptance, love. And when you had said, Bob, and I think this is really important for all of us to take heart to, is we can create healing community in small ways. And it doesn't necessarily mean having to go to a circle. Like in the Catholic tradition, there's Jesus says, two or more gathered in my name, and I'm here. And that's kind of what I heard you saying too. Two or more gathered with the same intention, an intention to bring peace, to bring support, concern, love, interest, dialogue, new ways of seeing things. If that is set, then so begins the start of this shift in consciousness. We don't have to be alone with our suffering, but we can offer and create our own small circles of love and support. And that is something we all can begin to do. And I just I love that. I think that's just very, very beautiful and important.
And that's, that's so much of the efforts that we've tried to do. We, the three of us, have
Mm.
tried to do at various times in bringing people together and offering that support on a regular, on a consistent basis, on a recurring basis, knowing that people do have a place to come to with their concerns. And I like to describe it. I think, Marianne, you and I have discussed this outside of this podcast, but that there is a certain type of concentrated awareness in the process of listening with compassion. And that is not a skill that is reinforced in our society.
No.
No.
No, but I will tell you, I think people are finally starting to come around to that. I think that I'm not on, standard media, I mean, I don't watch the news anyway, but that's healing, not watching the news. But but I think that people are starting to realize that we are never going to heal what's wrong in our society until we actually sit down and talk to each other and listen to each other and show each other that we do care about each other, even if we disagree with each other. And I think that the concept of circles, whether we're doing them live and in person when we can, or whether we're doing them on Zoom to talk about some of our most difficult and most painful societal problems, is a way of healing, is very important, because otherwise we're just complaining. And I think that happens with an individual when they're ill, and I think it happens with a society when they're ill, is that complain, complain, complain. But if we don't take the step to come together and really listen to each other and talk, we are not going to heal.
And to realize that every ceremony that I have been in and every circle, and some of them dealing with very sad and difficult issues, there was always an element of joy in the fact that there was the gathering and the beautiful repeated types of specific parts of a ceremony, whether it be the song or the drumming or the special strawberries, whatever it might be, brings joy and lightness. And it's something you want to do. You look forward to it. And with, and this idea of coming together with different viewpoints and being able to let down the guard of having to prove what you think is right, and just be able to experience human being to human being and hear each other's stories.
Right.
And it changes everything and is pretty miraculous. So.
It is miraculous, isn't it?
Right. Shifts perspectives.
It does. It truly does. And I think that another show that maybe we'll have you back for, Bob, is a show on the role of ritual in healing. And because if you might want to speak to that a little bit right now, we're almost out of time, but go ahead, take it away.
Well, yeah, we could certainly have another whole session on what constitutes ritual, but they're in the what ritual does, if I were just to put it into a few words, is it creates a safe container for the change to take place. Because what happens in normal life is that we develop patterns of thinking and behaving that become self-perpetuating. So if it's flawed thinking, if it's a belief that limits my ability to function within the world in some way, my day-to-day life reinforces it. But when we come into some sort of a ceremony, we create a new space, a space that allows for change to take place, an expectation of change, and a reinforcement by anybody else who happens to be there and be a part of it.
So, Bob, how can people find out more about what you do and the kinds of ceremonies you hold?
Well, certainly anybody can go to my podcast if they want to hear a little more. I have a podcast called Healing and Spirituality in World Cultures. It's on iTunes and all the major platforms, so come check that out. Healing and Spirituality in World Cultures. I'm in the process of a new website, but in the meantime, email me at my prehistoric email address, bobv1111 at AOL.com. I can't say that without people laughing.
Me too, Bob. I still have an AOL, and my kids just make fun of me all the time. They're like, nope. And they've made me Gmail accounts too.
I know. I have a Gmail account too. But I'll use my AOL account. So Bob V like Victor 1111 at AOL.com if you'd like to be on my mailing list or just correspond.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bob. Your wisdom is just a pleasure to always be in earshot of.
And thank both of you ladies for having me on today. It was my pleasure.
Great. And we will have you back. We'll do that discussion on ritual. For the next 2 weeks, we are going to have Kay Olin, Mohawk Wolf Clan storyteller and elder, to give us some of the wisdom of the Haudenosaunee, the wisdom of telling stories, women's wisdom. So she'll be here next Sunday and the Sunday after. And Melissa Goodblanket, who was scheduled for today but had some other things she needed to take care of that came up, she'll be back with us in the future to talk about her people, the Cherokee people. And we hope that you can join us for all of this. Thank you so much, everyone who's listening now or who will be listening in the future. And again, we are, of course, on iTunes or iPodcasts or Apple Podcasts and iHeartRadio. We're everywhere. You can find us everywhere. Thank you so much, Bobby Lacera and everyone at Strong Island Entertainment, for opening your hearts to let us be here with you today. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Bob.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Maddi and Marianne.
Thanks all around.
I'm one of the girls.
Join us anytime.